Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Esoteric and a continuing series. Is that an analog in your pocket, or are you just happy to see me? Where I show you all of the OpenFPGA cores, give you a setup guide on how to install them, set them up, enjoy them, all the different diverse settings, and most importantly, start playing some amazing games on your Analogue Pocket. And today we're doing Game Boy Advance, one of my favorite handheld systems of all time. Before I get too far involved though, do me a huge favor, go down below, hit like and subscribe, and ring that notification bell, definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined and want to support the channel, we got a Patreon link down below as well. But the Game Boy Advance was such an awesome handheld, and on Analogue Pocket it is great. Just be aware this is a guide for OpenFPGA and not putting Game Boy Advance cartridges in the slot in the back of your pocket. So the settings you see here are not going to be the settings you see if you are using actual cartridges. Do be aware that this is one of the systems that needs a BIOS included, or else it's not going to boot any games. You'll see the GBA_BIOS.bin right there. Just keep that in mind, because if there's no BIOS, there is no game whatsoever. You will see that all these games here that I own cartridges for, I have them. I'm going to unzip the files, and I can go ahead and just delete the zips from there, because we are putting in the unzipped files to make sure that they work on Pocket. You can just go ahead and delete these so you don't end up accidentally dragging them over to a folder and wasting space. You will see that all of the games are going to end in the .GBA format. That is what we're going to be looking for the Game Boy Advance OpenFPGA core on the Analogue Pocket in and of itself. If we take a look at the assets folder underneath our SD card in the pocket, we will see that there's going to be three folders: GB, GBA, GBC. Make sure you keep track of this. GBA is Game Boy Advance. It's really easy to make a mistake and put it in the wrong spot. And if we go under Common, you're going to see I've already added the Game Boy Advance BIOS, and I have one game in there as well that I use for testing. So all I'm going to do is copy over all of these games that I own. I'm going to hit copy, and I'm going to paste them right into the GBA Common folder. The BIOS would have to be dumped from your original Game Boy Advance that you 100% own. You'll see here I have a little bit of a duplicate file, so I'll just say skip that right there. So now we have all the games we want to play within the Common folder under Game Boy Advance. So if we just move back here, you'll see Common, then you're going to see Game Boy Advance, and then from there, if we move back one more, we're at the root menu. Don't forget that I did a tutorial on how to update your pocket and make sure all of these different cores come down, and all of the files you need to play Game Boy Advance should come down with this as well. That way you just add the games you own and you're 100% good to go. If you haven't set your SD card up yet, there's a link below to get you set up. You want to use that before you watch this tutorial. But otherwise, please stay tuned, because there's a lot more involved in making sure you get the best experience out of your Game Boy Advance on OpenFPGA. So if you come in here, obviously the Game Boy Advance is a handheld, so it's going to be under the handheld option, and then it's just alphabetical Game Boy Advance. It couldn't be any easier than that, but I'm just showing you just in case. And you'll see that all of the games that we added here are going to be 100% available to play, ready to go. And by default, the core does a pretty good job of setting everything up, but I am going to go through all of the different diverse settings that you can articulate to make sure you know what all of them do, which ones are beneficial, which ones might not be beneficial, so you get a great experience. But right off the top, Game Boy Advance looks, sounds, and plays amazingly well on OpenFPGA on the Analogue Pocket. Whether you're in handheld mode or docked, there's an option for you, and it's just going to 100% work. It's going to be a great experience. But let's go into the menu and talk about what we have here to change around. The first thing we have is controls. By default, this sets itself up exactly as I would expect it to and what it should, but if you want to change any of the buttons around, like the face buttons, if you want to swap B and A, you can do that in here. Now, as far as dock mode is concerned, it's pretty much open season for whatever controller you could possibly want to use. Anything with a D-pad, 2 shoulder buttons, and 2 face buttons, it's going to 100% be a good time for you. Generally, I use the PlayStation 4 controller. I just really like how it works. Those bumper buttons on the top just seem to be really well. Xbox One or Series X controllers are also an awesome option, giving you all the different inputs you need. And if you have a Nintendo Switch and a Switch Pro controller, also a great option. Because the Game Boy Advance had so few buttons, you can pretty much bring any controller to the party and you're going to have a good time. But as we drive around the course in Mario Kart here, everything feels responsive. It feels like playing an original Game Boy Advance, except with a much nicer screen if you're in handheld mode, and on your television if you are docked. But let's go over some of the other diverse options we have here. High quality audio is marked as yes by default. I see no reason to change that whatsoever unless you have any sort of audio issues. There's also rumble available on certain games, and you can change the strength right here depending on what you want. Now you're going to see a bunch of options that are said disable layers 0, 1, 2, 3, and sprites. This will basically disable some of the graphical layers on your favorite games, and I don't know how I managed to get this far around the course in Mario Kart without not being able to see the actual course in and of itself. But if you notice that any of your graphics are missing, go in here and make sure that you have all of these unchecked, or else you're going to be completely missing things within the game. Now do be aware as well that Game Boy Advance is one of the cores that allows save states. If we go into memories here and under save states, you will see I currently have one for Castlevania Aria of Sorrow. So let's go ahead and create a save state by holding the menu button and then pressing up on the D-pad. You'll see a save state has been created, and we'll just go ahead and finish the race in last place because I was driving around a lot without seeing the cores. If we come into memories and we go ahead and go to save states, we can load up the state that we just saved, and you're going to see that we're warped back in time to where we just came from, and we can finish the race in a completely different manner. That is something that the Game Boy Advance core offers. Not a lot of cores do, but do remember that you do have save states. But let's go into something like Castlevania Aria of Sorrow, a game that I've already played on the core. You do have in-game saves as well, things that would have saved to the cartridge in and of themselves, but because we have the save state, we can just load the memory up, and it's going to bring us right back to where we created that save state when I did the introductory setup guide for Analogue Pocket in and of itself. And if you do need that, the link will be down below. That way you have it. But it's so fun to have save states. It's good to train yourself on different games and get used to them. Just be aware that you read this menu, all cartridge-based saves will be replaced with memories. You will be better off knowing that warning. But again, coming through here in Castlevania Aria of Sorrow, this is just a better Game Boy Advance if you want to play in handheld mode. Now I have a Game Boy Advance and a Game Boy Advance SP, and both of them do have screen mods, but neither one of them hold up to the absolute quality of something like Analogue Pocket. If we move over to The Legend of Zelda here, some games you don't really want to use save states. It's better to utilize the actual save from within the game to give yourself a better overall structure. So play around with those save states if you want, but 100% just be aware that sometimes you actually don't want to use them. And I will say the Game Boy Advance core has absolutely spectacular audio, as good as the Game Boy Advance would, so go ahead and listen for 35 seconds so you know it sounds that good. It's just doing a great job being a Game Boy Advance, and that's all we want out of our Analogue Pocket. And all of the color renditions, the accuracies, just look spectacular docked or in handheld mode. But like I said, do remember that this is just a guide for the OpenFPGA core. So some of the settings, including screen filtering that might be in the cores when you use cartridges, are not going to be available when you're using OpenFPGA. Analogue says it's coming soon. They are a little bit delayed, but hopefully we do see that soon because it's one of the most requested features people keep asking me about in comments. But there's absolutely so much to love on Game Boy Advance on your Analogue Pocket. I just hope you didn't skip through the tutorial because there are some important bits, and some people comment saying they missed something and I just give them a time code. Just watch from start to finish. It's going to be a lot better for you. But as far as the controls are concerned, they're responsive. There is no lag. I'm running through the original level of Super Mario World here on the advanced version with absolutely no issues whatsoever. And if you did skip ahead to the end, don't forget you need to have a BIOS file. A lot of these cartridge systems, people expect that they don't need one, but for Game Boy Advance you 100% do, or else it's not going to work whatsoever. But the Analogue Pocket makes such a great Game Boy. I hope someday the Analogue Pocket actually does a new form factor in the Game Boy Advance shape with that same great screen so we have options. But otherwise, if you follow along with this tutorial, you'll be playing Game Boy Advance today, and if you have any issues whatsoever, leave me a comment down below, and if I have the time to help, I'll check it out. Short of that, go play some Game Boy Advance, one of my favorite systems of all time, and it's great on Analogue. See you next time. Bye-bye.